Is it possible to build organizations and businesses that do no harm at scale across industries in Africa? This week at Studio Equator, we engage in a thought-provoking discussion with the founder of Illyrian, Samuel Gikandi, who firmly believes that it is possible to create businesses, technology, and systems of service in favor of development of human consciousness and ecosystem regeneration in pursuit of love, well-being, and freedom in Africa and beyond. My name is Anjuroga, your host for today. In this episode, we unpack the refreshing stories, events, and ideas that have shaped Samuel Gikandi into a visionary, doer, and thinker like no other.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome, Sam. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Had an interesting weekend.
Right.
But yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah, good to be here.
All right. Yeah. To get us started, I'm curious to know, beyond being a techie, MIT graduate, and CEO of Africa Stocking Group, tell us, who is Samuel Gikandi? And how would you describe that to a 10-year-old?
Oh my God. I think Samuel Gikandi is a curious person.
Mm-hmm.
Loves learning.
Wow.
And loves learning by experience.
Mm-hmm.
So he's someone who really wants to experience the world.
Okay.
Samuel Gikandi is someone who pays attention to harm, and someone who wants to do no harm.
Okay.
I think that's been my motto since I was a child. So I'm also, that makes me deeply empathetic. Makes me deeply, I don't want to say internalized, but I'm always looking for a better way out. So through all my experiences and especially this year.
All right.
Just always thinking about how do we improve this. Sam is also a fun-loving person. He's cheeky. He can be funny.
Right.
He's good to talk to. I'm the kind of guy who can jump into any conversation, and really, I love engaging. I love thinking. I love experiencing. And he's in love. Yeah, he's in love. He has a gorgeous wife.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's totally in love. I think that more than anything, ultimately, and just someone who's grateful to be here.
It's good to hear, especially the empathetic bit. I think that's not a trait that most men associate with. It's refreshing to hear that.
Thank you.
Speaking of 10-year-olds, I think the description that you've given us is very, easy to understand even for a 10-year-old. I'm curious to know, how was your childhood? And how has that influenced the man that you have become, the man that we're seeing today?
Yeah. I think actually there's two versions of my child. There's what happened,
okay,
and there's why it happened. And the why for me I think that's been my lifelong, just trying to understand. Because what happened was, I grew up in a very, I grew up in the village,
mm-hmm.
And in a household where there was a lot of violence. So there was a lot of, especially my dad being violent towards my mom and towards us. But then also grew up in a very beautiful part of the world, where, the sun shines, it's green, there's trees, there's fruits falling from trees.
Wow.
There's antelopes running around, there's rivers. I mean, nature was just so kind to us. And also in between Mount Kenya and Aberdare, so an extremely beautiful part of the world.
Okay.
Where people say life started, and I would never argue with anyone that says that's where life started. So that was an interesting experience. So inside the house, you experience a different kind of nature, like a nature that is very quick to cross boundaries, actually, and quick to harm, quick to ignore, to the point where I sought a lot of my solace outside. Outside is where I would play with. I would still harm some animals. I'd play with the animals. We'd go to the rivers. We'd walk up the forest. We'd just experience that nature. And I was also a very smart child. I was very smart. So if I was number 2, that was a problem. especially before I went to Alliance and found some other smart children.
Wow.
So that was, and that gave me a lot of confidence in my abilities. So I always felt like my mind can get me out of anything. If I put myself to it, I'll figure a way out. So that was kind of like it's a very balanced childhood.
Okay.
And I had a mom who was very, very, very dedicated to making sure that our minds had a space to learn and grow. So that was her focus. Actually, it was academics. It was she made sure we never went to school without school fees. And that was her one thing. She's like, if you're going to school, you'll have school fees. Everything else, you'll figure it out.
Wow.
And that meant she sometimes had to disappear during the holidays and like go and sell clothes and just try and make this work for us. And I'm very grateful that she did that, because she saw my biggest asset. She was like, your mind needs to go places. And and it did go places. I mean, I eventually went to Alliance, then I went to MIT, I worked in Morgan Stanley, I worked in Hong Kong. I've built a company across Africa. So my mind has been everywhere. And I'm just grateful that my mom at least made sure that happened. My dad was gonna have me pick tea the rest of my life. Maybe I'd have like 10 children. Maybe I'd be happier. Who knows? But my mom was very insistent on, your mind. That's what we need to nurture.
I think what I'm hearing is it's important that we have guardians who really believe in us,
who pay attention to you. Because she paid attention to me as a small child, and really saw my intelligence was a bit different, and and created that space where I could explore and really become, even in that tough environment, because she was also dealing with violence. So she had to find it within herself to actually extract herself from that situation and then extract us from the situation, me and my brother, actually. And then coming to today, I actually, somehow my intelligence somehow is now related with my nature, in a sense. And, this year I've gone through a lot of exploration, spiritual exploration, if you will, just to better understand my intelligence, which has been equally celebrated and shamed. So this year is when I really started to now connect my intelligence with my spirituality, and realize that as you understand yourself more, what you know is what you are, is what you already are. And then that's when I really now start to appreciate my childhood, because my childhood did teach me, I think it dragged me through every human emotion possible.
Wow.
From extreme joy to extreme terror, and anything in between, extreme fear, actually. And that's, for me, that experience is what, and this year has been the same, from extreme joy to extreme fear.
All right.
And when you start to condense those, then you really start to understand the meaning of life. And when you start to find purpose, there was a very high purpose to going through that kind of childhood, because it means that in any situation you can empathize, actually. You can empathize. I might start crying. That's quite profound. Really hoping that you found ways to integrate all that. Actually, and it's not been easy. It's not been easy, especially this year. I think this year is when there was almost like a step jump in awareness, for me. I think people say spiritual awakening. For me, it's like a forceful shift to another perspective, that is more profound, that is more balanced, that is more empathetic and less judgmental, actually. And I think that's integrating that into my life. And into my work as well.
How have you managed to integrate all those different experiences and just be at peace as a person?
And for me, that's and I think that's also and this year has been a lot of that. So just how do you integrate all this how do you bring order to this chaos.
Yeah.
Because I lead a very chaotic life. I mean, it's chaos galore. So a lot of chaos I created, but chaos just in the world. And I never run away from chaos. My wife will tell you there's chaos. I'm the one who's sitting there just okay. So, so I stay balanced. So it's given me that ability to integrate that and then quickly find a way forward. And I think that's how my mind works. Like I easily integrate experience. I always remember how people make me feel or how experiences make me feel. And then I integrate that into who I am and then learn a bit more about myself. And then I let go of what is not serving me. I think letting go is probably the biggest advice I can give anyone that's kind of in this chaotic environment. Yeah, especially letting go of what's creating this chaos or what's giving you anxiety, and in my position, especially, in this country, in this industry, in, my profile, it's tough. You carry a lot. You carry a lot whether you like it or not. But if you want to find yourself, I've realized really you just have to let go. And as you let go, you start coming more into yourself and you start tapping into, it's not like there's no chaos, but you're more balanced through those chaos.
Right.
You're more present. And I think anyone who's experienced this jump in awareness, spiritual awakening, and for me it was very sudden. It was almost like, one moment I used to tell my wife, I'm no longer judging. She used to know you are judging. But it's like that vocabulary disappears.
Yeah.
And that can be a very, very tough thing to do when you're juggling all these other things that are also causing you anxiety.
Right.
There's
something you mentioned in your response. You touched on shame.
Yes.
And I don't think that is a subject that we talk a lot about as Africans. And I don't think there's room for failure. Like as Africans, I think we've been conditioned from a very early stage, since you are in nursery school. If you're number last,
you're not good enough.
You're not good enough.
Yeah.
So how have you managed to integrate that in your life and, just make peace with?
Yeah. There's no...
all those labels.
It's a journey. It's not a destination.
Okay.
Because I've realized the not good enough trauma is so deep.
Okay.
It's part of who we are as human beings. We're not good enough. We're not good enough to be who we truly are. And that's why people get on spiritual journeys and, look to religion and all these other sources to validate that we are good enough. But then now when you pile on the trauma of colonization and slavery and being black and, just the realities of this continent, and you realize white people are they're feeling like they're not good enough. So, so we're starting with such a deficit. And for me, one thing I've realized is it's just getting to the point where I can quickly, within a good amount of time, accept where I am.
Okay.
Like right now in this moment, I could be feeling like I'm not good enough to be here, but if I accept that I'm doing a podcast with Anne, and this is where I am, then you quickly start to let go of what's not. Because shame a lot of the time comes from things that have happened before, your projection on what's going on right now. So as you let go of that, you start to now find more balance where there's no shame. And shame has been big for me. Actually, this year, I don't know if people have seen on my Twitter account, I never used to tweet anything because I never feel like I was good enough to tweet.
Right.
I never felt like my opinion mattered. And so that's been part of my exploration of, let me actually, practice that. Let me come into myself.
Right.
And once you really start coming to yourself, at the moment you come into yourself, there is no shame. Absolutely no shame. And shame is you projecting other people's feelings on you. You think they're shaming you. Ultimately, you're shaming yourself. But and once you realize that you're fighting yourself, then you can easily you can move from that moment of shame. You can't help shame kicking in. You cannot. It will kick in.
Right.
But when it kicks in, knowing that, hey, just accept where you are. You could be naked outside in the hallway and you're feeling shame, but if you accept that's where you are, you might now go and get the piece of cloth that you need.
Yeah.
So acceptance is another big thing.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be the best always. Just accept where you are.
Yeah.
There's no shame there's never shame in this moment. Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing is we all deserve to be seen and heard.
Absolutely, yeah.
Regardless.
I think we're all works of art.
Yeah.
We're living, breathing works of art that are creating new knowledge all the time. It doesn't matter whether you're let's say you say this person is lazy, they've been sleeping the whole week. I'd like to talk to that person and ask them, how are you able to be that lazy? Like, what goes through you? How are you able to rest for 7 days and like come out and be so refreshed? So for me, there is no wasted experience. No human experience generates more information than the other. I think they all generate, an equal amount of information. Doesn't matter if you're Bill Gates or you're the woman who is taking care of 10 kids in Turkana. Imagine how much information she's receiving and experiencing. So that dispersion of inequality or of knowledge for me doesn't make sense. And that's where now things like Hilarion come in. So how do you translate this kind of philosophy into how do you materialize this kind of philosophy into things that people can actually practice?
Sure.
And that's where I'm really, really focusing on right now.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us more. What is Hilarion? Who or what is Hilarion?
Hilarion. First of all, Hilarion is a love story. I don't know if many people know that.
Okay.
It's a love story. I think that's the one definition I keep coming back to because Hilarion. I started Hilarion as a customer database back in 2019 during COVID, actually 2020. I was on a call with one of my colleagues, and she was describing this system, and I said, okay, I can build that system, but what if I built the system that can build that system? Oh, that was interesting.
Wow.
And it was a system for distributing, so the Nigerian government wanted to distribute money to people during COVID. So we're going to build that solution. We didn't end up building it, but I ended up I built it and then I built Hilarion after that. And then as I was building Hilarion, actually, there's actually, funny enough, there's a Nigerian, Akinola, who's on the team, who came, and I was deep in my, tech, tapped me on the shoulder and told me, look what you've built. And that's when I now started to look at Hilarion a bit differently. And that's where the perspective started coming in of Hilarion. And then my wife, Leila Hussein, so she works a lot with women and girls, coming up with ways of doing no harm. Actually, when I met her is when I didn't know what harm was. I remember I used to tell AT people, let's not harm anyone, but there was no concrete definition of harm.
Okay.
And Leila is the one who actually told me about boundaries, and how ultimately if you set the right boundaries, then you can ensure that you're not being harmed. And that for me was very profound because it's that kind of wisdom that then starts to inform how you actualize things like be kind, all these things that do no harm. And from that point on, then I started to now explore. And through all this, when I met my wife and we fell in love, one of the things that we decided to do was create a space for each other to grow.
Okay.
Actually, not decided, but we naturally just did that for each other. And through that exploration, that growth for me meant finally confronting my childhood and, dealing with the good and the bad.
All right.
Starting with the bad, there's a lot of bad. I'm now trying to deal with I'm trying to remember the good.
All right.
But the bad was very, very, very clear. And I think that's a journey of going inwards and finding yourself. And I'm the kind of engineer who likes to build not what's there, but what's behind it. But then I realized I need to build what's underneath, what's in me. Like tap into that. What is that core basic instinct that we have as humans? And how can we tap into it in a way that will actually start to change our behavior in ways that are positive, in ways where we're not doing harm. So that inner work has been very, 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 I think that's been the most profound experience for me, and having a partner who can create that space has been very interesting. Now she works in the company, so hey. So the idea here really is can we create ways where this consciousness can be practiced
right
at a reasonable scale? Doesn't have to be a global scale, but just even at human scale. Like it is practiced, for example, in AT. I see AT as an Hilarion company,
all right, although
AT came before Hilarion. Because I had that consciousness even as I was building. I was not aware that I had it, but I had it. So if you look at AT before learn about. Because part of the big vision for Illyrian is, can we create value without doing harm? Because there's always this, I don't know where this consciousness came from, which said that the only way to create value is to harm people.
I see.
If you look at capitalism already separates you into two classes. Look at democracy, separates you into two classes. Look at all the value creating systems. Even patriarchy separates you into two classes. Nation separates you into 200 classes. Race separates you. Like, just creating avenues for conflict and harm. But is that necessary, or can we do it without creating those avenues for conflict and harm, without crossing boundaries in particular,
right?
Without allowing others to set their own boundaries? I think that's probably the biggest one. We don't allow people to set their own boundaries because inherently we don't trust ourselves.
I see.
We don't trust that people will set boundaries that are kind, that are humble, that are consistent with no harm. But then that means we just don't trust people, if that's what we are saying. So, but can we now make that something that can be practiced consistently? Can we build systems that reinforce that kind of behavior?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So if I hear you correctly, the first version of Illyrian was just, tech as we know it.
Tech. It was how do we do analytics differently? Basically, yeah.
Yeah. And now the second version of Illyrian, what you're building currently is, how can we build this in line with human nature?
Absolutely. Nature is very, actually, you've hit on it. So there's something called natural law, which I think that's what Leila really brought to my attention when she talked about boundaries. Because natural law says live and let live. It's as simple as that. Like, right. Don't cross boundaries, and if inevitably you will cross boundaries, create a space to have that conversation, so that justice. Because justice is that's one thing I've realized. Justice is so important in this reality. My God, that's why every religion has a judgment day. There is you cannot escape that. Even as a human being, it's something that will always eat at you. So how do we, for example, define justice in a do no harm civilization?
Okay.
What does that space look like? Who defines that space? How long should that space be there for? And then when you walk into that space, there should be no judgment. It should just be discernment. It's like, yes, you did this, but it now points back to why you did this. And this is not the second version. This is like the 2000th version of it.
Okay, yeah.
I think the Illyrian team, and you're on the team, you've seen
absolutely
just where this can go. And what's so exciting for me is, and it's something, I feel like it's not just knowledge, it's knowledge that I have become. And becoming knowledge means, it's like becoming math. So if 1 + 1 = 2, and you become that plus symbol, then immediately 1 + 2, 1 + whatever, like all those things, you become that. So it's not just knowing it, it's like you become a source for that knowledge. And that's it's so fascinating. So you can now apply it. You can now apply it in so many different scenarios. Okay. So for example, you could apply it to the health sector.
Yeah.
Just to think about, are we actually getting people to be healthy, or are we creating an industry so that people can have jobs?
Right.
Like, what's the point? Are we putting jobs ahead of people, having food? And are we putting their mental health? Do we even ask, for example, if it's a cancer patient, do you try and figure out where she is mentally? Don't you think that would actually help them create a bit more energy to now handle the physical rigors of that? So those kinds of thinking, all the way to education, because the knowledge actually that I've realized is knowledge. Well, I don't want to say, but it's knowledge that I believe everyone has, or everyone can attain, just by doing that deep inner work.
Okay.
So that knowledge now is knowledge. If it's knowledge we already have, then how come that's not what we had taught when we were young? Where we taught handwriting and physics and math and all this, instead of being taught, this is who you are. This is who you are at your highest. This is who. And you look at religions like even the Hindu religion, you are the universe. Well, how come that there's no class in school saying you're the universe?
In Africa, especially.
Yeah, especially in Africa.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's interesting also coming from the perspective of a black man. And I think for me, that's the perspective that is always ignored. Always. I will fight with my wife about this one, because a black man, you walk into a room, there's already and a black man who looks like this, obviously. Even my mom called me the other day complaining about how untidy my locks are. But you can see how it's like, if you look like this, then you must be this. And so especially when I started looking at spirituality, for me, it was very, you can see spirituality will somehow say, yeah, black women are the answer, but black men, for some reason, there is no role to play. So going through this, and black men are, I'm a black man, so I love myself to death. So I think black men are awesome.
Yeah.
So coming in from that perspective, and coming in from the perspective of someone also who's growing up in Kenya, growing up around the equator, growing up with all this nature, and then growing up and then going through this period, going through COVID, going through what Kenya is going through right now, a very tough moment economically. And I think all those things now start to melt into some kind of knowledge that, and then you translate that knowledge now through your own experience and come up with new systems. So it's an ongoing, and I'm sure if we do a podcast next week, maybe I'll have a slightly different perspective.
But I think what I'm essentially hearing is that it's a framework. It's a framework for building across systems.
It's a framework,
agri-tech, banking,
anything,
finance. You can adopt it into your technology. You can adopt it into your business,
into your way of doing things. And it's actually, because it's like finding the nucleus that can be used to build a new civilization. Because it's nothing complicated. We're not saying, now, we have new computers that go like this. It's just actually, even as we build these computers, we could apply these principles, these very simple principles around harm. And once you apply them, you can now start to tweak the system,
right?
So that the system is now producing outputs that are less harmful, or is looking at harm a bit differently. And also, and getting insights on things like human scale, for example. Just by observing nature, you can actually start to see what kind of natural intelligence do we have that we're actually not even applying. So there's a sense of, this is knowledge that we have deep down that we've forgotten. Once you start remembering, you realize, man, we've forgotten that we could learn by osmosis. We've forgotten that we could, you could transmit messages through a frequency, and the people on that frequency actually get to hear you and get to interact with your subconscious. So that kind of exploration is also quite interesting.
Right.
And for me, one thing I've understood about my intelligence, because I'm also learning, I'm just trying to understand my intelligence, is I'm very good at planning and timing. So I also look at what's going on in the world. And what's going on in the world right now is there's a shift in consciousness from the forgive trespasses consciousness to the do not trespass consciousness. And I think that's the shift that really is informing a lot of what I'm doing.
Right.
Because yes, we can say we're shifting, but then if you talk about it on Friday evening and then on Monday morning you're back in your corporate office job, the consciousness dies. So and for the consciousness to crystallize and become and be consistent, we need people to start practicing it, or building it into systems actually that practice it.
Right.
Because when systems practice that consciousness, it becomes righteousness. It really does.
Right.
You start living in a world where you're not. It's like how if you go to Western countries, for example, and there's a zebra crossing. You won't get hit by a car. Here, you don't know. The matatus might decide. But then they've become that consciousness. And I remember my friend went to the US back in the day, and he came back and he's like, a car will actually stop for you. Like, it's not here, but it's there. So imagine now doing that with a lot of other systems that exist, and then that becomes part of who we are. And for me, at the end of the day, this is a period where we are evolving in consciousness, and we just now need to create examples of what that new consciousness, that do no harm consciousness does, what it looks like.
So I think there's a proverb that says the only constant thing is change. So here we are adding the other constant that we need to factor in is natural intelligence and human nature.
Actually, because I've explored spirituality quite a bit this year. You know, I've gone into all the, and there's a new age movement that's kicking off, and it's consistent with all this numerology and astrological patterns. And one of the biggest things that comes out is your ability to be in harmony with nature. That's the Holy Grail. That is the Holy Grail.
Okay.
But then there is no know-how of what does that look like? How do you live in harmony with nature? And these are the systems I'm describing. So systems that, yes, you're doing your scientific advantage, your advances, your AIs,
technology,
all these things, but you're doing them in concert with nature, where nature is now manifesting along with you. Because you don't know what nature... Right now, we're struggling for minerals to build AI machines, but if nature is in concert, you don't know what nature can do. So, and ultimately in the movement, you find that's the force that we call God. It's that external orchestrator that is actually making this reality be what it is. So learning how to be in concert with nature. And I'm someone who is really feeling that that's how I'm living. There's a lot of harmony with nature. There's a lot of harmony. Actually, this year, if I look at my life and the world, it's like blow by blow, the same things are happening in my life. So if more and more people can actually start to live like that, I think then we would realize we are only exploiting 1% of our intelligence at this point. There's a lot more out there. And then we can now start to understand ourselves as whether are we interplanetary beings? Can we, for example, solve climate change? I was talking to one of my friends about climate change. And can we solve it by communicating with the sun? To vary the rotation of the earth. And, that's how the Ice Age happened. So you see how if you actually practice this and you become this, and it's a lot of this is what our ancestors, our traditional African ancestors, I know from my tribe, the Gikoyo, which you are as well, this is how we used to commune with nature. We understood ourselves to be part of this grand scheme of things. Even the people who've died are part of this grand scheme of things. But when we were colonized, that knowledge was gone. So there's a question of, can we now, because they came with new knowledge around spirituality that will help us understand what is actually going on, can we find that balance between our artificial knowledge and natural knowledge and just build a better world much more robustly? So that's where I am. You can see how it sounds very otherworldly, but it's a human experience.
I'm curious to know what triggered, what ignited your spiritual journey. What ignited that? Especially for you as you know, with the status that you have. Techie.
It's true.
I mean, MIT. When did you start adding the spiritual cup?
When I met my wife. When I met my wife, I think that's when because one thing she told me is, Sam, you're not okay. And I think she was the first person to tell me that, maybe in a long time. The first person to look at me and say, actually, you're not okay. And that's where I really now started to understand why I'm not okay. Like, what does that even mean? I'm not okay. Like, she'd ask me, what do you do? What do you do to make yourself happy? And I don't know. So that's what really started my journey into. And when I say spiritual, actually, I do have a gripe with the spiritual, but this is my perspective. I don't want to impose it on anyone because I feel like at the end of the day, all there is consciousness. There is consciousness and it comes at different levels. So we're all spiritual in many ways. But then how mine expressed itself, especially when I started now doing all this work on myself and understanding myself. And it's just a process of remembering myself. Remembering who you are as a child in particular, and what influenced, what makes you afraid, what gives you anxiety, what brings judgment into your space. And through all that also, I've, like every Kenyan, we've done CRE, we understand Christianity. I also converted to Islam. I also have dreadlocks, so I understand the Rastafarian movement. And I'm also Gikoyo. So I understand. And that was actually the Gikoyo traditional religion. That was very, very fascinating for me because it just talks about consciousness. Like it's really, you can see the underlying theme is how do we make people live in concert with their nature or with nature. So it's being more and more aware of. what that actually looks like. Yeah, and looks like I have the brain that can actually
absolutely your brain
integrate all these concepts, and it's, I think that's the other thing I think as well, and this is something I've noticed is your spirituality starts to shine when you find balance, especially balance between your masculine energy and your feminine energy. I think before I didn't pay attention to my feminine energy at all. I used to wear t-shirts, well, I'm still wearing a t-shirt. I used to but then I suddenly started tapping into that feminine energy. And feminine energy is really all about tapping into your intuition. It's the part of the brain that goes like this. There's always there's 3 or 4, many threads running at once. While masculine energy is very, it's what brings order. So it's very one-track mind. I think we've all seen that. But it's just the logic part of the brain versus the intuition part of the brain, and one being optimized to survive in this reality. But then now we're going to a reality where you actually can balance those two. And as you balance those two, as you balance your intuition and your logic, it's magic. It actually helps you to look spiritual, but all you're doing is just being a balanced human. And a balanced human does not harm. Right. There is no, you don't do harm. You don't see differences. You don't see color. You don't see all these things. You still survive in this world.
Sure.
But because you've balanced those energies, and the process of balancing them is what now, I think there's a quadrant of why was my mom good to me? Why was she bad to me? Why was my dad good to me? It's that simple. You just need to clear that conditioning that you have. And for me, even after that, I cleared conditioning around religion, conditioning around gender, around all these constructs, and conditioning now even around capitalism, around democracy, around these systems that we have. So you can arrive at that nerve center that is still there, even after you shed all that conditioning, and that's consciousness. And that consciousness says, don't harm. Don't harm.
Interesting. I think what stands out for me from what you said is the importance of having people who can speak truth.
Absolutely. Yeah. Truth is another, well, I have, so I have many ideas on truth.
Yeah.
The most fascinating one for me is truth is balance.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know the truth, you can never find balance. And it's something that people don't appreciate. And there is that one truth. There is one truth that is, and truth vibrates with different frequencies as far as nature is concerned.
Right.
So when I think about my life sometimes, and I don't know, I mean, as I explored Western spirituality, they talk about, interplanetary beings and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, if I am an interplanetary being, I would be born where I was born. Because it's right on the equator. It's balanced. There's a mountain there. There's always life. And that's a truth that for me has been because it's a truth that is still there. Even after you shed all the conditioning, it's still there. It's not like part of me is like now thinking that's not true. So, and once you know truth, and truth also now is understanding, for example, what natural law is, like live and let live. That is a very high, actually extremely high truth, because it describes love, it describes harmony, it describes being one with each other. And once you know that truth, then you can find balance. So yeah, and I think that's been, that notion of truth, that notion of there's something that is. It not will be, not has been, it is. Once you really get to that, it's such a powerful lever and tether for you. And then for me, I'm still learning more about truth. So for example, I don't know what being born around the equator and there could be theories around what that does to your pineal gland, for example, your ability to, because the pineal gland is a gland that allows you to understand when to go to sleep, when to wake up. But then you realize if you're born around the equator, you have the sun. So, how different is our pineal gland? We are melanated. What does that mean? Melanin can transmit electricity. What does that mean? What is the truth there? Like, what does that mean? Are there things that we can understand that other people can't. Are there things that they can understand that we can't? And those are some of the guides now that start to now surface very interesting knowledge about this reality and how this works.
Wow.
And once you have a story that can explain this reality, you can evolve it.
Interesting. So what should we look forward from Ilarion and Sam Gikandi in 2024? Now that, 2023 is...
Yeah, 2023, it's not over. I keep telling everyone, it might be about to start. Yeah, because 2023 for me it's been a year of harm. There's been a lot of harm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This year, people who've been around me for a long time who actually meant me harmed me this year intentionally. It's almost intentional. I'm even talking of maybe even like the president of Kenya in ways that are like, yeah, he's doing things, that's his job, but they're harming me, and it's very clear, and it's like surfacing all over the world. Even in AT, I mean, AT was a case study. So it was like, people holding knives. It was serious.
All right.
But then at the same time, my wife and I have been very intentional about taking care of ourselves. So we had some extreme highs as well. It's been that kind of year. And again, the year again where you go through your deepest terror to your highest pleasure within a very short space of time. So it's like my childhood all over again in many ways. And then that has now surfaced a lot of knowledge, a lot of, and that's the knowledge that we are putting together in Ilarion. I'm hoping next year we can start adding much more structure to this so that, and find more allies that would be interested in getting on this journey. Because, AT has done a lot of work to get here, but I feel like this is way bigger than AT in many ways. So I'm hoping that we can find, whether it's, even if it's governments or, private institutions or individuals or people that actually feel like this resonates with who they are, and start exploring that. Of course, we're going to start, we're going to have products that we're going to be building. So we're going to start with the tech platform where our thesis is you can have this reality, but the data can always belong to the human. There is no need for a human to be anxious about who's analyzing their data. And I was talking to some engineers right now, and we realized, you could write code for 10 years, but because Microsoft bought GitHub, now they can write that code in 2 seconds and charge you for it. So it's very humbling.
Absolutely.
It's incredibly humbling, but also there is no justice.
Yeah.
Absolutely no justice. So how are we meant to trust anything that's coming from that kind of consciousness? So trying to build systems that are safe from that perspective before even bringing the AIs and I have nothing against artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
It's just the process that's being followed that's extremely harmful.
Okay.
So that's one thing. Obviously, for me, I see 2024 as a year to create. So I'm looking forward to doing music. I'm looking forward to, especially we want to write poetry for the people who can actually rap, because me, I don't know how to rap. But we want to actually tell those stories and really bring out the black power, the black consciousness that I'm feeling, because it is black.
Amplify
I'm not gonna
that.
lie about it. It's based on our Africanness, and we should never apologize for that. Like, that's who we are. So bringing that out, especially in things like music, spoken word. And then we see what else other people do, because I'm hoping that we create a space where more and more people can come and create. I know my wife is planning to, really create a lot of tools on the well-being side, working with companies, working with individuals that really want to get on really want to work on themselves and build consciously. Do no harm guides. So just create that space where all these things start happening. And at the same time, make sure our little brother AT, our big brother, well, I don't know if big brother, or I'll call him little brother. Our little brother AT, make sure Africa keeps talking always. Because without AT, we would never get here. And AT had to do things the way AT did them for us to get here. And I think that was and that's why I say I don't know how I planned my life, but it's almost like I planned it exactly so that we could acquire this awareness and then now translate it into something that can transform this continent and the world.
Amazing. Our last question for the day.
Yes.
I think I'm looking forward to just seeing how this is going to unfold. But then you are going to reach out to our list. But then I'm curious where we are at right now. How can we plug in to the movement or to what you're doing? Just for individuals, how do we plug in?
Yeah, and I think that's part of what this podcast is. Just creating a space, because this kind of work cannot be done in secret.
Sure.
It doesn't work, especially if you're talking about consciousness. You're talking about building better systems, and part of this consciousness is what you get, you share widely.
Right.
You share widely, let people build, let them use it if they want it, if they don't. Because a big part of doing no harm also is making sure people have the free will to do this or don't. So I want to do it openly. And I can't tell you what this is. I can tell you who will walk in the door one day and say, actually, this is interesting. So I don't want to predicate what other people's free will will drive them towards, but I'm hoping that we start to resonate with, especially people who hold power today. The definition of power is changing very, very fast. And I think people who hold power today will really need to start aligning themselves with, what does the new definition of power look like? And it's a power that is way more powerful than anything we've ever felt. So finding those allies, obviously we have a website, illyrian.com, and we have a Twitter handle, IllyrianHQ. I have a Twitter handle, Gikandi, if you want to hear my ramblings. when I feel good enough to ramble, I do ramble sometimes. And then over time, we'll obviously now create more pathways for that. I think soon, hopefully, we'll have an app that you can experience as well, just to get a sense of, if you're building an app, if you want to validate that someone is human, how do you validate someone is a human without crossing their boundaries? So we're thinking about those kinds of solutions, and hopefully we'll inspire more and more people to do this. And the money aspect is important because we do want to create value, and in this reality, value is measured by money. So we're not doing this as it's charity. There's a real business model behind it. But at the same time, we're not doing it to be the ones that did it. We're doing it to inspire others to do it. And if we're the ones that did it, hey, we'll be here for it. But we're not saying that, now this is our gold mine. And no, this is knowledge that is free for everyone to just understand and use it. And we're always open to anyone that wants to have a conversation.
Right. We've come to the end of our podcast. Thank you for being our guest today. And we have a few wrap-up questions.
Okay.
If you may. Now, from your experience, what's the most crucial thing that needs to be given to African children in the early stages of development?
I think self-love. Because I think self-love is the deficit that we have, especially as Africans. And if you can't get beyond self-love, really you start harming. You harm yourself, you harm others. And if you look at today's world, and it's always like we always say, the Barbies are all blonde, blue-eyed, blah, blah, blah. And this is even from a woman perspective. There's a lot of shaming that goes around. So it's very difficult for kids to consistently love themselves, or even understand that it's important to love themselves. And self-love also comes from self-knowledge, self-understanding, a deep understanding of how powerful you are as a human being. Like, you reincarnated in this reality, and you're a human being. So for me, I think self-love would be very important.
How would you nurture that? With the current system that we have, how would you embed that gradually?
I mean, it's more teaching kids the tools that they need. For example, I've taught my son about boundaries and how to set boundaries, how to recognize when someone is crossing his boundaries, and so on and so forth. Because that is a very high expression of self-love. Because people confuse self-love with selfishness. It's two very different things. Selfishness comes from a place of it's a harmful place. Self-love comes from a place of, I don't want to do harm, but I also want to make sure that I'm safe.
Right.
So teaching kids how to do that, and then building that in and by the time they're getting to 7, 10, they're already aware of who they are in their full self before you start injecting all these vaccines called physics and chemistry.
Wow. All right. Catch them when they're young.
Catch them when they're young.
All right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess you've had a very challenging journey all through.
Yes.
I'm wondering, how have you been taking care of yourself? Or what does self-care look like for you as a man and as an African man at this point in your life?
Right. I think for me, self-care is listening to your mind. I really listen a lot to my mind. And the more work that I do, my body is also syncing up with my mind. So it always starts to me with my mental state. And understanding, first recognizing when I'm not in a good place. I think that's, then whether for me, it could be anxiety, it could be like a feeling in your stomach, or, just difficulty breathing, or just feeling like you're not present. And then now doing things that allow me to be more present. And that could be driving, for example. I mean, driving forces you to be present. You have to be present. Otherwise, it could be music. I listen to a lot of music. I go to therapy. I have a therapy myself. We have a couples therapy with my wife. I hang out with my wife. Ubuntu is important.
Absolutely.
So, I feel her energy, and we hang out. If we need to go to the coast, like we do things that actually bring us back to that balance, that presence. But it starts with recognizing that we're out of balance, or I'm out of balance, and I need to do that. Yeah.
Refreshing. Thank you, Sam Gikandi, for that refreshing and insightful conversation. And that marks the end of our conversation, African Kings and Queens. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to join or partner with us in this movement where we are unapologetically pro-human, pro-African love, justice, and values, reach out to us on our social media handles or email us at podcast@illyrian.com. Until next time, let's keep building responsibly.